Somebody want to spark up? No, well, not that. Relax,
you
brother.
was asking for a lighter for your incense, man. Listen. Figure some stuff out.
Not that spark up, brother.
We'll figure some stuff out.
Send some incense up. Take us there, brother.
Yeah, sure. Lord, thank you. For this opportunity, Lord. I pray that you would, that you would just be glorified by the conversation. You'd be in the conversation, that the meditations of our heart and the words off our lips would be pleasing to you and reflective of who you are. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, what do we want to say as introductions? I guess where we are from.
Like where we from, like how we grew up a little bit.
Right.
A little bit. Don't tell on yourself. Just let y'all know. I was struggling with shit. You said telling all your business. I'm just saying, introduce yourselves, let the folks know who you are and whatnot.
Broward County, which is the Tri-County area, means the Miami cultural hearth. So in South Florida, in other words, Southeast Florida. Yeah, so cultural hearth is an area.
I'm like, what's that?
Right,
straight deacon up.
He said,
Amen.
So
Say it again.
Say it again to find it this time, bro.
You in the house now. You in the house.
Oh man.
What you
But so like cultural hearth is like essentially like an area, like generally a city or something like that, where that's determinative of a culture, and like the cultural hearth extends outward from that city or neighborhood.
Okay.
And so like Miami culture, like obviously the epicenter of that is probably like North Miami, something like that. South Miami, if like depending on like the music and stuff like that, and then it sort of radiates upward and outward through the Tri-County area. There's a lot of urban sprawl. So I'm from just north of where Rick Ross claims to be from. Carroll City. He's like, he's talking about Carroll City a lot. So I'm from just north of there, Miramar. Yeah, my dad's Argentinian, mom's Puerto Rican, so very Hispanic. We talked a lot of English in the house though, and Spanish, Spanglish. I always had all sorts of friends. We used to go to a very peculiar church before we went to the church that I generally grew up at. It was led by an Italian dude, but he was like a Florida Italian dude, like those kind of like weird, ugly stories where somehow he ended up like from New York all the way down here, and but his son-in-law was super country, and so it was like a country-ran Italian pastor church, kind of Baptist like church with a whole Jamaican and Haitian congregation, but like some American black people sprinkled in. And it was like a very similar sort of friend group I had in Christian school. Actually, most of my class was Jamaican, African American in Christian school. A lot of Hispanic people. Again, like white people were obviously present because it was Christian school. But like what was once an escape from Jim Crow became like this very multicultural thing. I didn't really understand like racism until like later, and like and like it really broke my heart because it was one of those things where it was like, it doesn't make sense to me because I grew up in this neighborhood that was very melting pot-ish. And then later when we started to experience like formal like racism and like prejudice and stuff like that, again, it always bothered me and my other Hispanic friends that used to hang out in the group because these were our best friends, you know what I'm saying? And so, that's how I grew up, very, very integrated upbringing. I went to a high school where white people were statistically non-existent. So that was fun. And it was cool because I was in the marching band there. And it's like you get these people who are culturally like me who play the same music as me. And like to this day, they still watch anime and stuff like that. So it's like a lot of like the weird myths surrounding like the prototypical monocultural black person, where it's like, oh, this like guy out there squeezing triggers and being super ghetto. Like it never made sense to me because like my friend group always sort of disproved that. Like, sure, we would all listen to, we took sides in the 50 Cent versus G Unit and the game and whatever beef that was going on between the rappers in the early 2000s. But then we would also talk about Dragon Ball Z right after, and then we would talk about Vibes Cartel songs. And like why we didn't like compa or why we did like compa, and we would all sort of trade jokes back and forth. So it was just like it's a very strange upbringing. I'm just finding out because that's not most people's experience, and if it is, they pretend like it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then I went to college and stuff, and moved up to PA to go to seminary, and that's where I met this guy. And we went to rival high schools in Broward County, and boom, yeah, rest is
Your team Ratchets history.
histoire.
Sort of. Yeah, my name is Noble. I grew up in Broward County as well. Just a different part of Broward County from Juan. I grew up north of Juan in Fort Lauderdale, south of Pompano. So like right in between what everyone's image of South Florida right now is Kodak Black. So I grew up somewhere there.
I thought he was from like Georgia or something. I don't know.
Ew. So yeah, we gonna forgive you for that, brother.
Please. I accept that.
But so I grew up in that general vicinity. You know, single parent household. You know, just moving and shaking, trying to do what I can. Do everything I was big and bad to do. You know, I was just running wild, just a little kid, thinking I'm grown. And then I think when I hit high school age, it just life kind of got real for me. You know, I had to start thinking about college because my mom's that type. You know, you ain't staying here when you're 18. She that type. So like, you know, the horizon was visible. You know, so I had to start thinking about what I was gonna do. I couldn't, you know, just run the streets off my whole life. So, you know, graduated high school. You know, beating the statistical odds that they had for me. Said I was gonna be dead by the time I graduated. All that kind of stuff. So graduated 3 point something. I don't remember. It's not important. And then I went to college, man. You know, went to FAMU first.
Hey.
Brought some of that hood stuff with me to FAMU. So they was like, "We're gonna have to let you go, son." And then I went to Savannah State.
They kicked you out of family?
Huh?
They kicked you out?
Something like that, yeah.
Real,
I told you that, don't snitch on yourself.
You put it out there, brother.
But you know, what I'm saying, we parted ways. We amicably parted ways, you know what I'm saying? And I went to Savannah State, took a year and, you know, just did some reflecting. And then I went to Savannah State, you know, got a good degree. And you know, thought in that time, like while I was at Savannah State, you know, the Lord called me to salvation, and you know, I was like, I'm gonna be a preacher because I can talk good. But you know, you know, so me and a few elders got together, started talking about it, praying about it, you know, decided on a place way up north where it get cold at. It was like, you know, I need some jackets and some Timberlands, and then I never got the Timberlands. And then once I got up here, man, I got to Westminster. It was great time there. And I met this guy. He was always on campus being loud.
Yeah. Bringing
all
Brian
that
with
time.
us. Yeah.
So
Know what they do, boy.
yeah, you know, I would hear him before I would see him, stuff like that. And,
Right, and then we just start looking around like.
yeah, and you know when you antisocial, you headphones in, locked and loaded.
You can still hear it.
You know, so
that noise ain't canceled.
yeah. We're not gonna talk about the brand, but you know, and so yeah, it was a good experience. But when we was on campus, we would always talk about the same thing, you know, just race relations, and if you believe in the term race relations, but you know, just talk about cultural backgrounds and stuff like that, and divides, and so you know, it slowly rolled up into this situation what we have now. So
I grew up in, I guess, a split upbringing. Lived in North Philadelphia for about 11 to 12 years. I grew up in a household with 6 siblings, so I'm the third oldest. Yeah, older brother, older sister, me, younger sister, 2 younger brothers. So
Nice.
we squad deep, man. So the year that my youngest brother was born, 1999, that's when my dad got into a car accident. So that kind of, that put a strain on the family. So one of the things that we couldn't do was bring him home because he was in a wheelchair. So like we wound up actually moving to the suburbs. We moved to North Wales, Montgomery County, and honestly, like I was sad that I wasn't gonna be around my friends anymore. But in terms of like not being in the hood, I ain't care. Like I was excited because we had a pool. I was like, oh snap! Like we got grass. Like this is different. Like you know what I mean? My first day walking to school, I seen a family of deers ran past me. That joint scared me. Like it wasn't just cats. It was deers. I'm like, these joints is big. So it was a whole culture shock, man. Being in the schools out in North Wales was just a different world, man. But I lived in North Wales pretty much up until I went to college. And then I went to Bloomsbury University. After that, moved back to West Philly. So I've been here about 6 years now.
Nice.
So yeah, grew up in a Christian household. I don't think I fully understood the gospel, or I don't think I fully could actually live out my walk until I got to college. But I feel like when I got to college as a freshman, that kind of showed me like where I stood. You know what I mean? Me having that freedom, no moms around to tell me like don't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
or nobody forced me to go to church because I'm on my own.
Right.
That kind of showed me what I really wanted. So the first couple years of college was, I'm surprised they didn't kick me out. You know what I'm saying? But it's neither here nor there. But the Lord definitely intervened. I feel like my junior year is when I started kind of walking seriously with the Lord, and from there it's just been uphill. I would say I'm one who never fully understood or just brought into the race gimmick. Like I was never the person. Yeah, I was never the person that just like blindly just did what this is what I'm supposed to do because I'm this complexion. Like I always question. I'm like, why? Like, why? Because I don't have my pants like this. I'm not in that group. Or how come because I choose to wear boat shoes that you identify me as this, or being white, or I get a good credit score, you call me white because of that. Like to me, it never made sense. Like, and
Right.
I never got that. So, yeah, I was always one that kind of like swam upstream when it came to that type of stuff. Like,
Right.
I didn't just kind of like fall in line. You know what I mean? So,
Right. Yeah.
So here we are today. Met Juan at church, like I said earlier, Epiphany Fellowship, and yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
all she wrote.
What was Redeem Ratchets? You know what I'm saying? Like, what do we mean by Redeem Ratchets, right?
Right.
Because I think when you hear the name, you think you have your own inclination of what it means, and just wanting to be clear on what we mean by it.
Right.
And then, starting from there. So now you know who we are, you know what we stand for, and
Right.
then moving forward, anything else we talk about, you're not thrown off by it. All right, cool.
Right.
Just so we understand.
Yes,
So
excellent.
we're all on the same page.
Yes. We're on the same screen.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be pages in like
Right,
5
that
years.
was-
I mean,
That was an extraneous comment. The puns. So it begins. All right. So, why do we exist, Noble, as Redeem Ratchets?
Why do we exist? I mean, I think one of the things that, well, should we just give them like a whole story of like?
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, all right. So like,
So,
I
like-
think when we started at Westminster together, we started having these conversations about, different cultural backgrounds, and we saw like there was so many fellowship groups on the seminary campus. And,
Chinese, Korean, Black.
yeah, and it
Trying
was
to start
just,
up a Hispanic.
and then there was no like intermingling of cultures, and I think one of the things we realized, like as we were there, like not only is our theology big enough, but God is big enough to incorporate all of these different cultures, and like they're all level at the cross. And so, and then there was the whole Alton Sterling thing, and Philando Castile thing that were just in your face, aggressive, and it made everyone, all of the different cultural groups, just as in your face and as aggressive, in like either super division or super like coming together. And so I think that's the time we started having real serious conversations about what can we do as just two individual kids from the hood to deal with this thing that we're seeing happen in front of our face. And so when we started having those conversations, we ended up in all sorts of strange places we're not going to talk about, but just having conversations about what was good about the culture that we are from, and what was good about the culture that we had loved so much. One of the first articles we wrote on our blog was Grandma's House, and like Grandma's House as an article was about some hood grandma who just loves everybody on her block, and we all if you grew up in the hood, at least you all, even if you didn't, even if you just grew up in a small community, there's a grandma on the block. She checking on you, she calling about you, you hungry? She watching you out the blinds. She gonna snitch. Yes, she see you doing something out in the street she ain't supposed to be doing. She know your mama. She calling. And so like, but
him doing?
Yeah, and so
your child.
That was the first article we wrote, because we know that's something that everybody should be able to relate to. You know what I'm saying? Right. Even if that's not your grandma, a grandma like that. And so that was the genesis of all we've been doing for the past 2 years. Right. is just trying to get people to understand that the idea of ratchet doesn't always equate to something ugly and nasty and dirty. But the idea of ratchet is something that is still under God's sovereignty, and it falls under His umbrella of common grace, and even that can be redeemed and is redeemed. That's just a part of it. I think Juan got something else to say.
Yeah. I mean, so I was taking biblical counseling classes at the time, and what struck me was people either didn't know what to do and say in the face of a lot of these things. Like they had no inkling of a clue. They just sit there like, and try not to be open mouthed, because when you're in seminary, you gotta have an answer for everything, right? And then from sitting like this, they would kind of like unskillfully comment, whether it was whatever, like unskillfully, unwisely, sort of like the same idea, comment. And it was just one of those things where it was like, the Lord has given us enough in the scriptures, and He's given us enough by the Spirit that like we can skillfully talk about these things in a real way. And then also just looking back on my experience, it just really helped me, like, categories of like friendship, and like Ed Welch wrote a book called Side by Side, and that really, it changed my life in the way I process. He said that there's not a line, the way the Lord designed humans to live in community, that runs merely between us, but it runs through our hearts. And I got that my little Christian voice runs through our hearts. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, and like that changed me, because like it just like it started to retell a lot of the stories that I experienced as a child, and it was just like, you know what I'm saying? And then he said, you want to move toward people, you want to listen to the themes of their heart. I took several of his classes, and that really just revolutionized why I was so why I took friendship so seriously growing up, and why now that now that my friends started to die, I actually had one friend, he got beat to death on accident. Like they jumped him and they beat him and they dragged him to Liverpool with a car, and he died of brain contusion a couple hours later. Like, why that affected me so deeply, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that, stuff like, I had a friend, he died like last year, like why did that affect me so deeply? And like why, like when people in the media start dying like that look like my friends, and why that would affect people so deeply. And like, so I started to put my finger on these things, and like, rather than get upset about it, I was like, you know, we have to like move toward each other. We have to listen to themes of the heart. We have to talk about suffering. Like, that's just not a theme we get. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of, you did this wrong, people are doing this wrong, but there's no category of like people are suffering. That's another thing I saw. And like the Bible talks about suffering. You know what I'm saying? Because we're under rebellion of sin and the curse of sin, right? So that's the sort of like the three things that like God created it good. It's all things, and so all cultures are rebellious. So it's not just, you know, the black culture, the white culture, or the Hispanic culture, or the rich culture, or the poor culture. It's, all cultures are actively use the gifts God gives them to hate God and hate neighbor. That's the best way of putting it, right? So people are like, oh, I love God, while they're angry with their neighbor. It's like, no, you hate God and your neighbor. That's the way the scripture teaches us. And that, but because the Lord loves humans so much, he makes their life miserable, so that we don't just look down and say God is pleased by this. That's why our world is so broken. It's in part due to God's curse on everything we do. And so that was something. And so yeah, we just wanted to talk in that. And like, you know, my story is I increasingly moved toward black people, I guess. You know, just because like it was familiar, like that. Like, those were my friends in middle school. I went there in high school, and I experienced this crazy culture shock when I got to undergrad. Like, I was very tempted to post on Facebook so one time, one of my friends in high school, he was on the drum line. He was high, and we were like sitting around outside the band room. He was like, "Hey man, like, you know how like BET and the novellas, like, there aren't really black people like that, or Spanish people that are that dramatic, but like they want to make like black people look bad." We were like, yeah, you're right. He's like, bro, I feel like Nickelodeon and Disney Channel do the same thing for white people, dog. And so we were all like laughing. We were like, bro, you right. And so like I went to Christian college, and I was like unsettled. I was like, yo, like, there are all these people that act like the Disney Channel. Like, this is a real thing. I couldn't believe my eyes. And so and then, you know, I actually met some friends on the Tamarind Court. I bowed down church and stuff like that. And yeah, man, you know, those guys helped sustain me through. And again, like my mentor, Dr. Terrell Bird, and like, you know, like they helped me explore that identity crisis. And again, what I came out with was, we are one in Christ. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like our categories of race are don't allow for those realities, and that's a problem. So like, that's why we exist. And you know, again, the stuff I saw on the Tamarind Court, there was a lot of ugly stuff, a lot of killing, shootings, this and that. You know, you hear stories of what happens, and you know, the police don't come when guns get shot, stuff like that. But you know, again, I saw GP. She was a grandma, and she fed people. You know, I saw like playing in the projects. I saw like people couldn't take care of their kids, but there was one lady that cooked for everybody. You know what I'm saying? I saw just so many beautiful things. And then when I got to Westminster, and all I heard was Philando Castile, oppression, this and that. And it wasn't even people that have really been around the hood for real. So, yeah, so anyways, we felt like we just had to get the good news out that like there's always beautiful things in addition to suffering and sin. And we celebrated in white majority culture. Why wouldn't we celebrate it in black culture? So yeah, that's why we exist. Sorry, that was quite the charade. It's just like,
do you think there are unredeemable things in culture, or is everything redeemable?
So when I think about unredeemable things, I think there are some types of music that are unredeemable, but they're not necessarily what you might be thinking of, right? So it's like, I think there are some artists that people may feel we should love that make unredeemable music. Your music is trash. Stop making it, right? That's how I feel about it. I'm not gonna say nobody's name because I don't want nobody to get offended, but I'm just saying there are some people that people may think we should love that I think their music is just boring, trash, and they should stop making it. Take some time, live, emote a little bit.
Learn how to dance some real bachata.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Do something else for a little bit, come back to
Bachata.
it.
Wait, is that bachata?
The boom 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 boom.
Oh yeah. It's like the rumba.
Yeah, sort of. So like
I know a little about your culture. Alright.
I know a little bit.
I know a little bit about your culture.
just a tad. It's like the difference between boom bap and old school rap. You know what I'm saying? It's a slight difference. It's the same beat, but it's different.
See.
So like rumba has a slightly different beat.
Is there anything unredeemable though?
Yeah, the reason why I ask is it's like as I'm listening to y'all, it's like, all right, there's this. I see this majority culture, and they praise or they uplift the ratchetness in the sense of their culture, and it's like, dang, like even us civilized, not necessarily ratchet per se, it's like we can't even get that to be elevated or on an even playing field. But we see them taking the I'm assuming the slums of their culture and kind of even elevating that above our, somewhat good culture. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's what I'm hearing. I feel like. So I'm just curious. Like, all right, well, do we try to go like tit for tat? Is it like, all right, well, we're gonna take our, slums and see what we can elevate? Like, and if that's the case, it's like, okay, well, is there anything within that scoop that like is everything in that scoop good to use, or something kind of like,
we gotta pick that out. We gotta
is there a selectiveness and like, I don't know. I was just curious to.
Yeah, so I guess like our mission statement, I think, makes it really clear. It's like that's kind of like the history of Redeemed Ratchets. But like after doing it for like a year and a half, almost 2 years, we came up with a mission statement, and that is to bring confessional Christian categories and appreciation to the race conversation. So by confessional Christian, like we alluded to it a lot. Obviously, if you look up Westminster Theological Seminary, you're gonna know it's a confession-bearing school. And so what that means is like the Westminster Confession of Faith, Three Forms of Unity, the which is the Heidelberg Catechism, and like the all that sort of thing. Those are faithful summaries of Scripture's doctrine. Mm-hmm. And they are internally consistent, in those are the terms and categories we should use to interpret any culture. Again, so like in those things, they're gonna talk about creation, good. They're gonna talk about an ethical fall. So that means it's a behavioral fall. Sin is a behavioral issue. It's not a metaphysical issue. So what that means is that the Holy Spirit coming upon you helps change your behavior. It doesn't necessarily do anything to your nature, like to like your physical body until you're given a resurrection body, right? Like what's wrong with the world isn't like sin didn't change the metaphysical nature of things. God did. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like and so then that from the jump already excludes this sort of whiteness is way up here, blackness is way down here. That like we're trying to combat. Because of like creation in the image of God, everyone under the same curse of sin, and also again all cultures being subject to the and all cultures as natural generation of Adam being sinful. So I think like if you start with those three categories where it's like creation, fall, then like it gives you the categories to see where the so-called meat is and where the so-called bones are. Where it's not like, this ice cream scoop that's actually a bunch of fat and there's a little bit of meat, but there's a lot of bones and there's some doodle in there. Yeah, none of that. You know what I'm saying? And then I would even argue that, like the confession, like when it talks about external righteousness, I think like that's a lot of what we started talking about, where it's like if there's external righteousness out there in majority culture and in founding fathers who owned slaves and all this stuff, which no one would sort of try to fight you on, then why is there not external righteousness over here? You see what I'm saying? And like the confession would follow the scripture in saying that these are non-saving works, but that it's worse off for the unregenerate if they don't do these works. So just like that sit. So to where it's like, you know, something like some of these grandmas are not Christian. A lot of them are, and again, you know, like I've heard people say that, you know, this grandma in the project, she could pray the roof down, she could pray heaven down. Mm-hmm. Sure, but there's other ladies that don't love Jesus and do these same things. But it would be worse for them if they didn't cook for the neighborhood, or you know, like that sort of thing. And so I think like that's the hermeneutic we're using, where it's like it's external righteousness versus internal righteousness, and like if we're gonna call one thing externally righteous, we have to call the other thing externally righteous if it parallels it. And then another key point in our theologizing that we want to sort of add to the Westminster Confession of Faith is like sort of a proper understanding of the nations that's coming out of Babel, and like that when Christ like when Christ dies on the cross, he positionally redeems everyone by delaying the wrath, so that the gospel can spread across the earth to all nations and gather what had previously been scattered by Babel, right? And then that again, like that gives dignity to all the cultures, which is already there in the Old Testament, by the way, right? Because God showers blessings on who? The children of Abraham? No, the children of what? Men, right? And so, anyways, like I think that those are our two big things. That like to the confessional tradition, which is a good starting point, we want to add an understanding of the nations, which is implicit, but it's not explicit. And we would say, so it's like sort of not stated outright, but it's there. And then the reason why we would say that is like in a racialized era, we need better categories to describe why people are different. Like when you got people running around saying, you know, all black people will necessarily act this way. You know, you have to be able to give them an alternative. You shouldn't think that way. You should think this way. And we believe Scripture gives us those categories very clearly. Yeah. So, is there anything unredeemable, Noble?
I think if we're just talking about practical things, I think yes, there are some things that are unredeemable. I think there are some forms of art, cinematic art, that may be unredeemable.
It's like porn. Porn is unredeemable.
I don't know why he feels the need to be as crass as he is. But
I mean,
but all right, yes, pornography. You know what I'm saying? You know, I there was a time where I would have thought like, you know, some heavier music, like your screaming music. What is it? What is it called?
Death
metal, stuff like that. But
stuff.
yeah, but you know, there are some bands within that space that I've seen do it, you know, with grace, and you know, it's not my thing, you know, necessarily, but you know, it's tolerable.
I mean, secretly it's my thing.
Word?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Word? Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, for sure.
That's secretly it's my thing. Yeah, I can see
That makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Totally makes sense now. Got it.
That's why it's so weird.
Yeah, you know, and I think if we're using, if we're using confessional categories about unredeemable things, I think, you know, one of the things that we're called to guard our hearts from in terms of lust is like the things that we input in ways we input. So like there's some books that you might not, you know what I'm saying, that might not want to get into, some movies, some music, some that stuff. But broadly, I would say those would be the only things I would consider unredeemable. You know what I'm saying? Just like the things that continually push you toward sin. Like those are the things that I would consider that in that category. Yeah, man, redeem Ratchets on everything, honestly, except Twitter, because Twitter be tripping. Redeem Ratchets on Twitter too. It's just spelled weird.
Redeemed.
Yeah, redeem D Ratchets.
Redeemed.
Yeah, and then redeemed Ratchets everywhere else. Instagram, Facebook.
Not a Facebook.
Instagram, Facebook. Instagram, Facebook. You can catch us on the playlist, Apple Music and Spotify, man. We drop that every month, the first of every month. Yeah. And then the website, redeemratchets.com. Like That's it. That's us. You can follow us individually if you want, but probably not. Don't do that. Just don't worry about it.